Thank you, Alan. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank the program committee for the generosity of giving me an hour. And it's my responsibility now to keep you entertained for that hour. So I do take that very seriously. My day job is actually getting involved in submarine transmission, optical transmission for subsea. But I've become increasingly passionate about artificial intelligence and particularly the way that it's affecting the power consumption and our green aspirations around the world. So being a lazy person, I decided to ask AI, particularly Copilot, give me a bullet point summary on how AI will give benefits to mankind. Just like all AI responses, the responses look fantastic. High-level bullet points. It gave me some sub-bullets. I did the visual arranging, so that's my job. But there's always a deeper story. There is a World Economic Forum report on this if you're interested in some real experts talking about it. But in particular, I started to ask myself the question, will AI really be good for the environment? So that's the focus of the rest of my presentation. And luckily, Bill Gates says, yeah, but there's nothing to worry about. Be happy. Now, I'm not sure Bill Gates is necessarily an impartial commentator on this topic. So if we look at reports by the International Energy Agency and also an increasing number of newspaper articles about not only the energy aspects of AI, but the water consumption, there are 3 interesting reports there you can check out. And by the way, please download the slides. It's full of links. There's all sorts of links that I've to the various documents I've used to create this presentation. But why do we seem to be rushing headlong into an AI future? It just seems you cannot get away from this at the moment. And of course, what people are seeing, in particular the hyperscalers are seeing, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that's why they're building huge AI data centers. And just to give you a clue as to what's behind this, it's money, right? They're not doing this for altruistic reasons. They're doing it to make money. So why now? Why has this suddenly become, really, really top of the news? So this is my first recommendation. If you can find this article, the link is in the bottom left of the slide. It's by somebody called L.M. Poe. I've no idea who this person is, but they've written a fantastic history of artificial intelligence. I stole this timeline from that article. Again, lazy person. So what really I would highlight in this timeline is 2017. A seminal paper by Google identified the concept of a transformer architecture for machine learning. And transformers suddenly made AI actually look intelligent. So that's really the why we've seen this initial explosion. So this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, once the AI actually seems to be something useful, started to gather momentum. Now, Steve Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, he's brilliant at sound bites, right? So he gives these, he's asked, how do we get to the doorstep of this next leap in prosperity? And he said, well, in 3 words, deep learning worked. But it's much more interesting. He expands it to 15 words. Deep learning worked. It got better, predictably better with scale, and we dedicated increasing resources to it. So this is the part that gets really interesting. Something has worked for them to make money from. In order to make money, you need to invest more heavily in processing power, basically. And they start, it's a chain reaction. You start seeing better and better results as your AI starts to become more sophisticated. So what happens? An ecosystem forms, a market starts to form. It starts with the original hardware manufacturers, people like NVIDIA, of course, who are making loads and loads of money from this. The hyperscalers who are building the artificial intelligence neural networks. Then you've got the developers and the integrators actually creating the solutions and implementing them. And on the bottom there, you've got all the people who benefit indirectly. Air conditioning companies, the companies that provide all of the materials to build the data centers. So then we start to see the growth in this market. This year, it's likely to be about $250 billion. Now, I've been around for a while. You can see, I'm a couple of hundred years in this industry. So what's happened is this is the fastest growing new market segment I've ever seen in my career. It's crazy. And I was around for the internet bubble in the late 90s, and that seemed crazy. But what's happening is a reinforcement of behavior. And I'm not talking about the AI, I'm talking about the people who invest in the AI, because what they're seeing is growing valuations in the companies that are pouring in this investment. And think about the way venture capital models work. If you get proof that something is working, suddenly everybody jumps onto that bandwagon and more money pours into that marketplace. So that means data centers are getting bigger. You may remember a few years ago, we were very impressed with Meta's Luleå data center in Sweden. 30 megawatts. It wasn't just a building, it was a whole campus of data centers. Fantastic. 84,000 square meters. Well, the biggest data center this year, let me just go back one there. The biggest data center this year is 150 megawatts. That's 5 times more power consumption than Luleå. It's in China, the Inner Mongolia Information Park. 1 million square meters. Absolutely enormous data center. And of course, in 2028, which is the largest announced data center, it's 3,000 megawatts in South Korea, a $35 billion investment. This is just insane, the growth of these data centers. Now, if anyone knows anything different, by the way, please let me know, because you can check out 3 different lists on the size of data centers and you get 3 different answers, particularly with China, because China reports certain figures, then people get satellites and they measure the size of these data centers. That doesn't seem to add up. So who knows? But they're very, very big. Okay, so clearly we'll be building a lot of big data centers. So what kind of resources do they consume? For example, do they consume a lot of water? Simple answer, yes. This is a report on AI data center water use. It's from the University of California. They identify what are called Scope 1 and Scope 2 water usage. Scope 1 is the water consumption in the data center, as you'd expect, for the cooling primarily. But Scope 2 is, well, how is that data center powered? Because it turns out, depending on the power source that you choose, it will consume different amounts of water. The amount of water that they're estimating for 2027 is between 4 and 6 times the consumption of the entire country of Denmark, right? So that's an enormous amount of water, 4.2 to 6.6 billion cubic meters per year. Now, as I said, a big factor in how much water the data center consumes is how you power it. Because it turns out that nuclear power, which, as we'll see later, is becoming increasingly popular with AI hyperscalers, that is the largest consumer of water of any of the major power sources. But that's not the whole story. Let's talk about a few basics of electricity. How does the world generate electricity? So this report comes from Our World in Data, covers about a 40-year period, and we can see energy consumption is rising. It's roughly tripled in those 40 years. And some of you who are concerned about the environment, you might be going, oh no, this is awful. The fact that we're using so much power is horrible. No, it's not. We shouldn't feel guilty about the fact that we are using more power, because power is prosperity. Look somebody in the eye who lives in the third world and tell them that they're not allowed to have an air conditioner, right? That's not ideal. They'll be living in 45 Celsius conditions very soon. We cannot stop people using power, and we must not. The thing we need to be concerned about is how we generate that electricity. Because in that same 40-year period, if we look back at the beginning, we see that fossil fuels accounted for 63% of electrical generation. 40 years later, how much progress have we made? Well, it's 61%. But it's not quite as easy as that, because 2 and a bit percent is actually bio something or other. Hang on a sec. 2 and a bit percent is bioenergy. And the problem with bioenergy is that some of it's clean, or at least carbon neutral, and some of it really isn't. Biomass, for example, has got about the same carbon footprint as coal. So it's not clear that we've really reduced CO2 per kilowatt hour at all. However, an important part of how we use the power is actually how we move it about. It's the national grids that we build. So grids are really essential in efficient use and distribution of power. So, you know, this audience will be very familiar with the concept of a grid because it's kind of like the internet. It's a cloudy thing. And so you have information. No, it's not information. It's electricity that goes in from coal or gas, nuclear, hydro, and the grid has to both transmit it and then distribute it out to the end user. And you need different voltages depending on what you're doing. If you're transmitting, you need the highest possible voltage to have the minimum waste of electricity on the journey. If you are distributing it to households, it's very, very bad to have 265,000 volts going into a house, right? So you need to step it down to lower voltages. So the distribution grid steps down. Now, the clicker's a bit sluggish. So regular customers, like cities, when I say regular, I mean ordinary customers, like cities or farms, they use the distribution grid. They take the power out at the distribution grid level. Whereas renewable installations, wind and solar, they tend to feed in to the distribution grid at that level because they don't produce very much power. So you feed in at that low voltage level. If you have storage systems, like batteries or pumped hydro, they actually have a two-way connection into the distribution grid because sometimes they'll be giving energy into the grid as you discharge them, but sometimes you need to power them back up again, pump the water up to the top of the hill or recharge the batteries. So very high demand users like data centers, particularly AI data centers, they'll connect in to the high voltage portion of the grid because they use a lot of power. And they'll also have, a lot of times, solar panels on the roof, a few windmills stuck in the garden, and they'll be generating a small amount of clean energy themselves. But they need a grid connection because those solar and wind farm energy sources are intermittent. If the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, there's no power. So you need to pull the rest of the energy from the grid. Now, a new city needs an enormous amount of energy. But think about it. How long does it take for a new city to grow? There's a new city being planned just outside Cairo at the moment, but it's taken 15 years to get as far as it has done. And it means that the electricity company has got some time to plan the expansion of the grid. But a data center can pop up within 3 months, but it has a huge amount of power consumption demands on day one. So it really puts these grids under a lot of pressure. And power grids were already under pressure because of renewables. Renewables don't work very well with power grids because they generate DC, not AC. And power grids are synchronous. And if anybody remembers SDH, and having to synchronize the entire network, you may be aware how tricky it can be sometimes to have a synchronization hierarchy with a national network. Well, it's the same thing with AC power grids. You need to synchronize to the AC frequency. So many countries are experiencing grid congestion issues. So I'm from the UK, and we are a particular poster child for incompetence when it comes to national power strategy. So I can speak with authority on this topic. We have something like a 5-year wait for solar parks and wind farms to connect into the national grid. Well, that's insane, right? This is a climate emergency. Has anybody forgotten the bit about emergency? We also have housing projects stalled because they can't get grid connections, and we have a housing problem in the UK. But it's the same in the United States. And of course, the US isn't one country, it's 50 different countries, and they've all got these different grids, and everyone has different rules and things. So it's even more complicated there. But if you look across Europe, the story's the same thing. These are wind farm projects waiting to be connected to grids all across Europe. So you could say, relax, I ticked the box when I bought my air tickets and I planted a couple of trees, right? So I offset my carbon footprint. Maybe. There's a couple of reports, one by the University of Cambridge and one by an organization called REAL in the States, about the problems with green energy or clean energy certificates. And the basic problem is that these schemes are incredibly badly regulated. And it turns out, and keep this to yourselves, but humans are quite corrupt. So if they see an opportunity to make some money, especially when governments are pouring money into these projects, they think, yeah, well, I'll take some of that money. And of course, you end up, oh, those are the same 2 trees that that person planted when they ticked the box. You know, it's a very, very poorly regulated scheme. In Australia, they have really good data on this. They have these things called Australian Carbon Credit Units, ACCUs. And you can map the increase in Australian carbon credit units against a decrease in real green energy projects being started, right? Clean energy agreements, which a lot of hyperscalers are using, you know, they're saying, well, hang on a second, it's a real pain to actually build a solar farm or a wind farm, and we can't even connect them to the grid anyway. So why don't we just buy some virtual clean energy instead of generating real clean energy? And yeah, again, a couple of reports, one on the domestic market, one on the corporate market. And it turns out, again, companies are basically trading in clean energy contracts as a quick fix. And in fact, you could argue that this is a negative factor within the clean energy market because it's giving them an easy way out instead of doing the right thing, which is to build clean energy projects. So let's pause for some case studies. I'll just have a quick sip of water. So the biggest data center market in the entire world is in Virginia. Massive successful market. We have a 30% compound annual growth rate since 2014 and around 4 gigawatts of power consumption by data centers in that region. Huge market. You guys probably work with people in those areas. I certainly do, because a lot of subsea cables are terminated on Virginia Beach, and they go to these data centers. So what do they need to continue that success? They need 11 gigawatts of new data center capacity by 2030 in Northern Virginia alone. And that, if they turn that up, that would represent 40% of the whole state of Virginia at the moment. So that is a massive amount of additional energy to turn up. How do they get there? So they need 10 to 15 gigawatts of firm generation capacity. So that means coal, gas, or nuclear. It doesn't mean solar and wind. But the problem is it can take 3 to 4 years to approve a new gas-fired generating plant of about a gigawatt. That's a bit of a problem. They need 10 to 15 of them. And the problem is that market prices are too low for developers to take the risk of building them, because the developers are saying, well, hang on a second, these are still spewing out carbon dioxide. And I think at some point, somebody's going to notice if we build a lot of them, and they're going to start asking us to close them down, right? So you can understand their point of view. But this is what happens when you let free markets dictate your energy strategy, right? It's not a good thing. So, surprise, surprise, data centers in Virginia are facing a 7-year wait for connection to the grid. So their response is to actually bring their own power, right? We can't rely on the local electrical company. We need to bring our own power. Let's take a look at one of those cases. xAI's Colossus data center in Memphis. So Elon, of course, he has big ambitions. He wants to build or he has built, the link to the press releases on the bottom of the slide, he has built a 100,000 node cluster outside of Memphis, Tennessee. 100,000 H100 GPUs, and he wants to scale it to 200,000. And this is all for the self-driving stuff on Tesla vehicles. But 100,000 H100s need 150 megawatts of power. So where did he build this data center? He actually bought an old Electrolux factory, which used to make refrigerators and washing machines. Now, it turns out they don't need all that much power compared with an AI data center. So the local power company had only put an 8 megawatt feed into their data center. So what Elon does, he just gets some natural gas powered trailer generators. So, 14 of these parked outside the data center gives him another 35 megawatts. Well, we're still quite a bit short. So let's see if we can find some more of those trailers. So this time from solar turbines. Is this green energy? No. It turns out these are natural gas powered as well. So, not ideal, not ideal. But they give him another 64 megawatts. Well, he's still short. Well, what about kind of upgrading the feed into the facility? So the power company has said, oh yeah, by the way, smog levels in Shelby County have already exceeded recommended levels before he started parking natural gas powered generators outside of his data center. So the local power company has agreed to upgrade the site to 50 megawatts, only a third of what he actually needs, which is, we're getting there. And XAI themselves have committed to building a 150 megawatt substation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this terminology, a substation does not generate power. It's just a connection point. It's just to make sure you can get enough power into the site. So where does the power come from, right? Maybe the Tennessee Valley Authority, which runs all the electrical stations in Tennessee, maybe they've got some hidden power source they're not telling us about. Oh no, the Southern Environmental Law Center basically says the grid is overloaded. Now you'll notice I say it's not a direct quote because these are lawyers, so it's about 5 paragraphs of saying there isn't enough power. We don't have enough power. Okay. Now, this is not stopping Elon. He says, no, I'm going to expand Colossus to 1 million nodes. I don't care that I can't get the power for it. So this is interesting because that represents 27% of NVIDIA's 2023 shipments. So that's quite a big chunk of their output. Maybe he could get them, maybe he can't, I don't know. But where are they going to get the 1.5 gigawatts of power that they need for 1 million nodes? So who knows? Who knows? Oh, and by the way, if you're expecting to drive up with a whole bunch of new natural gas powered trailers, don't bother. There's a 90-week lead time on those trailers now because everybody's onto that particular scam. Now, let's look closer to home at Ireland, which is an incredibly successful economy that is being driven by hyperscaler investments, especially with data centers. But is the party over? Because in Ireland, at the moment, data centers account, actually somebody I think updated me when we were chatting earlier, it might be 25% already. It's due to rise to 30% by 2026 of the electrical power being consumed by data centers. So 30% of all of Ireland's electricity is being used by data centers. That's an enormous chunk. And Google actually had an expansion of a data center rejected outside of Dublin because they said, hey guys, we just haven't got the power for you. And they're sort of rethinking that now. At the moment, over 50% of Ireland's electricity is still generated by fossil fuels. Now, Ireland is doing something about this. They're building more wind power generation, but they also have a massive connector that's going from Southern Ireland, an undersea connector, going from Southern Ireland into Northern France, and that will carry nuclear electricity, right? Nice, clean nuclear electricity. So Ireland doesn't have to build their own nuclear plants. They can just use France's. So how do we actually power AI data centers? Well, what do the AI data center operators actually need? Maybe that's a good place to start. Look at the requirements. So first of all, you need gigawatt scale. Look at what Elon is doing, right? He's thinking on this sort of gigawatt plus scale. But you also need, oh, by the way, here's a list of cities you could power with a gigawatt of energy, right? Including Dublin, Amsterdam, Liverpool. These are not insignificant cities. And as I say, it's taken decades for cities to rise to that level of consumption. Data centers can do it overnight. You need a 24/7, 365 energy supply, which is exactly what coal, gas, and nuclear deliver. Unfortunately, solar and wind are intermittent. But that's okay. You can connect it all to a grid, and you can use grid energy when you're not generating solar or wind, if you can get connected to the grid. Hydro, geothermal, tidal, and wave, they're location specific. You can't just use them everywhere. But again, if you can connect to a grid and you've got hydro somewhere else in your country, then obviously you can take advantage of it. You need a compact installation for the simple reason that you could build it right next to the data center and avoid a grid connection. You just connect directly into your private power station. And you want low CO2 emissions. Now, I would say condition number 4 has now become optional. I think you can start to see a problem here, right? You know, think about the original title of this presentation, the environmental impact of AI. Because if you look at Google, and I don't want to pick on it, you know, too many individual companies, because they're all doing it, by the way. It's just that Google happens to have produced a report. And Google, basically in 2020, they said, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Since they made that commitment, they've increased CO2 emissions by 48%. Microsoft made a fantastic commitment. And I think, you know, this is the kind of commitment we need from companies. They said back in 2020, we will remove all of the CO2 that Microsoft has ever put into the environment since the founding of the company, but you know, in the mid-70s. And we're going to do that. Originally, it was by 2030. It's now slipped to 2050. But since they made the commitment, they've increased CO2 emissions by 29.1%. And again, it's easy to point fingers when they kindly actually report this data publicly. So at least they're still reporting. Now, what about batteries, right? I mentioned about solar and wind not always producing electricity. Well, batteries are actually intended, grid-scale battery systems are intended to flatten something called the duck curve. I think I have a link to the duck curve in a hidden slide before this, maybe. So the duck curve is basically, if you look at during the day, its consumption during the day tends to dip in the middle of the day, exactly when solar is generating the power. So you've got nowhere to send your solar. And so what you can do, just charge up batteries. Now, if we look at the cost of lithium-ion batteries over the history of the technology, talk about a success story. I've got new data, because our world in data information stops a couple of years, back in 2018 actually. And in the last 7 years, lithium battery costs have just dropped off a cliff. So that technology has actually fallen in cost by over 99%. That's a staggering success rate. But the problem is this. Why don't we take a look at the largest combined solar and battery grid storage plant in the world and see how big it is? Now, when we talk about how big, we can say how big in 2 different ways. One is, how big is it? In other words, it takes up 3,530 football fields, or soccer pitches, as an American might say. This is the Edwards and Sanborn Solar and Energy Storage Facility in California, right? It's huge. Well, hopefully it produces massive output. Well, not really. 864 megawatts. Oh, well, it's got batteries as well, so it's got massive battery storage. Well, not really. 3.2 gigawatt hours, which means the largest combined facility in the world could power a gigawatt scale AI data center for just over 3 hours. The largest in Europe, 40 minutes. It's in Belgium. Now, another thing to think about when we look at solar and batteries is solar panel waste. It costs between $20 and $30 to recycle a solar panel, but it only costs $2 or less to send it to landfill. So if we are talking about free market economics, which I did mention was like the worst way to plan your energy strategy, that is not good. Unfortunately, the European Union has stepped in and they're now saying, hey, you need to build in a cost when you sell a solar panel to make sure that it's recycled, right? Which makes sense. Lithium battery recycling, so difficult to get reliable numbers, anywhere between 5% and 59%. I know for a fact in the United Kingdom, we've got this huge wave of electric vehicles being sold, and we're now getting a massive, warehouses full of lithium batteries from electric vehicles that have been in accidents. Two reasons for this. Number one, the companies involved do not publish their APIs and data models for how to service these battery packs, except for Nissan. Nissan have open sourced the Leaf. And number two, insurance companies. As soon as they see any damage on a battery pack in an EV, they write the car off. And that battery, what do you do with that battery pack? So they're all stored in flame-proof warehouse facilities around the UK at the moment. It's crazy. What about the power options for data centers? Here's the list, all of our potential candidates. So let's start looking at this list against the requirements. For gigawatt scale, that table is a list of the largest facility in the world for each different energy source. So if we're looking at gigawatt scale, we can scratch off tidal and wave because they're not gigawatt scale. Incidentally, well, no, I'll give you this surprise later. If you want reliable energy, you want a high capacity factor. So the table at the bottom is the typical capacity factors for different energy sources. What that means is how much of the time does it actually generate power? Nuclear is the winner by far. Surprisingly, coal is a loser. Coal, like British sports cars, spends a lot of time being fixed, right? Any of you who own a British sports car will know this, right? Well, it turns out coal-fired power stations also spend a lot of time getting fixed. But you can also scratch off solar, wind. Solar and wind, because they're, the sun doesn't shine very much in Europe anyway, but it certainly doesn't shine at night. Hydro as well, apparently, because you can't always generate hydropower. You may not have enough water level in your reservoir. What about being compact? And again, there's a very complicated chart. You've got a link to that chart there, and I've scratched off hydro, solar, wind, and coal. They're not very compact, especially coal, because you tend to have a very big space. Guess what it's for? It's for them to put all the coal ash that comes out of the coal-fired power station. That coal ash, by the way, is radioactive, and nobody measures it. Nobody measures that coal ash for radiation. Whereas, of course, nuclear plants are not allowed to emit any radiation. But if you live downwind from a coal-fired power station, yeah, you probably glow in the dark by now. What about low CO2? Well, again, you can scratch off, which ones did I do there? Oh yeah, natural gas and coal lost out there. So you can see that certain kinds of energy source have got multiple crosses against them, whereas we've now left ourselves with two potential winners, and that is nuclear and geothermal. Geothermal, in the table on the left, you can see there is a geothermal plant that is 1.59 megawatt output. That's actually in America. It's in one of these national parks where you've got geysers and things like that. So what about the materials that we use by different power type? So for manufacturing materials, this is predominantly cement, concrete, glass, and steel. And you can see that nuclear is by far the winner. Geothermal is not too bad. I would draw your attention to solar. There's an orange block in solar. So not only does it use quite a lot of materials, that orange block is stuff like lithium, indium, for indium tin oxide, massive user of the element indium. There are certain elements that are in that orange block where we don't have an unlimited supply of those on Earth. So it's not clear, unless we start recycling solar panels pretty soon, it's not clear that we'll have enough of those elements. What about water consumption? Now this is the problem. Water and geothermal are amongst the worst, nuclear and geothermal are amongst the worst water consuming power sources. You'll also notice there's a couple of options for solar there. It's called CSP, concentrated solar power. Some of you may have seen these stations in Spain with loads of mirrors that point towards a high tower. It's actually a really good form of solar power because it can be 24/7 for reasons that I could explain. But unfortunately, it's a dying industry, and what's killing it is solar PV. So solar photovoltaics are killing off solar CSP because it turns out photovoltaics are much more cost effective. So that's interesting. Now, geothermal, 3 different papers there. I always like to look at more than one paper because the project Innerspace was specifically set up to market next generation geothermal, so they may have a slight bias. On the other hand, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, has often been accused of promoting fossil fuels and nuclear over renewables. So maybe they've got a bias the other way. Hopefully, the Idaho National Laboratory, which was also, that report was endorsed by MIT as well, maybe that's a middle of the road report. So you could check out all 3 of them. Geothermal is a form of nuclear power because what happens is you have radioactive elements under the ground. They heat up the subsoil, or the stuff that's underground. They heat it up, you pump water down, and you make steam. So that's how geothermal works. In some places around the world, this heat is easier to get to than other places. That's conventional geothermal. And here's a list of countries where you'll find quite a lot of conventional geothermal. But in total, geothermal represents less than 1% of the world's electricity generation today because it's not available everywhere. However, there is a new kind of geothermal, enhanced geothermal. So with enhanced geothermal, we use fracking techniques to open up more locations where you could operate geothermal. Ooh, that word fracking, does that cause like slight discomfort in the room? It doesn't in America. I gave this presentation in Atlanta and they were fine about it. So the pros of enhanced geothermal: potentially low CO2. Notice the asterisk. Whenever you dig a hole in the ground, stuff comes out. Now that stuff, that's a technical term. It's things like carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide. Now, some of those gases are regulated if you sign the Kyoto Treaty, but like America, if you didn't, they don't measure the CO2 that comes out. They don't have to. But the others, they may measure. It's a 24/7, 365, potentially a small footprint. A really important advantage of enhanced geothermal. If we are trying to close down the oil and gas industries, wouldn't it be nice to have all of those trained engineers with decades of experience and give them jobs to do? So enhanced geothermal, the skill set matches really well with the oil and gas industry. So as you close down oil and gas, you can employ them in enhanced geothermal. Now the disadvantages: potential emissions, right? Nice balanced thing. Now potential waste production. When you're using these wells, in addition to the gases that come out, there's this stuff called slurry that comes out, and it's really nasty stuff. It's very toxic in many cases because they put things into the well to make everything work better. Various chemicals that usually leach into the groundwater and start to poison people. That's what they found in the United States. You also have potential for seismic disturbances, as we found in Europe as well. So the big disadvantages for me, though, most of the enhanced geothermal designs are megawatt or tens of megawatt scale. They're not gigawatt scale. There's only that plant in Yellowstone National Park that was at the gigawatt scale. It potentially needs a lot of water, and generally speaking, they're unproven. However, if we read the Idaho National Laboratory report, they say there is an enormous potential for this energy source. And actually, $600 to $900 million for 100 gigawatts of relatively clean power generation. I think that's a bargain. That's a really good price. So, possibility. Now, you've all been waiting for me to talk about nuclear, because nuclear seems like the perfect solution to power AI data centers. or does it? Uh, excuse me. Let me just introduce you to a few issues. Now, I first gave this in Atlanta, which is in Georgia, right? And in the state of Georgia, the Americans happen to have built their most recent nuclear power stations. So let's take a look at those. Vogtle 3 and 4, 4.5 gigawatts of power output, looking good so far. Yeah, we could power a lot of data center capacity with those. However, the original time frame, when they were supposed to be running in 2017, slipped to 2025, 8 years. And they are 2.6 times over budget. And these are not small budgets, right? $37 billion is not a small budget. Oh, well, what about the UK, right? We're building new nuclear power stations. 3.2 gigawatts. Again, yeah, this is what we need, multiple gigawatts. Except ours have slipped in time frame and we've gone 4 times over budget. No, hang on. We've got to find somebody that uses a lot of nuclear power. What about the French, right? Let's look at the French. Flamanville 3. Again, a 1.65 gigawatt output. So we're in the right ballpark for scale, but it's 13 years over budget and 6 times more than it was supposed to cost. This is a recurring theme with Western nuclear power. Why? Well, there's a common thread that runs through all 3 of these countries. The last time they built nuclear reactors was a generation ago. In the US, it was 1973. The UK, it was 1988. In France, it was 1991. They've lost a generation of experience of people who actually understand how to build nuclear power plants. Another little fun fact, these are all pressurized water reactors. Where do you think the fuel comes from for the world's pressurized water reactors? A little company called TVEL in Russia. Because I mean, there is some made in France, but it's a different kind of fuel. So, but the basic design of PWR all uses Russian fuel. Now, the nuclear part, I would contend, may not be the only problem, because no mega projects these days come on time or in budget. If we look at the Three Gorges Dam, not a nuclear project, it was 4 times over budget. Look at the project to save Venice from flooding, 4.7 times over budget. What about the Big Dig in Boston, the tunnel under the river, 8.5 times over budget? These are mega projects. We're just not very good at project planning these days. Were we ever any good at project planning on a mega scale? I don't think we were. If we look at the Sydney Opera House, it was 14.6 times over budget. If we look at the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, it started in 1883. It's still not finished, and nobody has any idea of how much money people spent on it. And you don't even need to be on Earth. The International Space Station is 10 times over budget. So, you know, that's wherever around the planet, right? So, yeah. Now, one way of dealing with this is to make the reactors smaller. There's a terminology I'm going to use in this table, SMR, small modular reactor. So what we see here are the hyperscalers published plans for their power strategies. Now, again, this is a bit of a passion project for me, this presentation. So if anyone has more up-to-date information on any of the slides, please do contact me, because I want to keep this presentation up to date. Amazon, in the short term, very, very famous. This was very publicized. They purchased a 900 megawatt data center next to the Susquehanna nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. Susquehanna nuclear plant, 1.8 gigawatt output, and Amazon said, yep, we'll have 900 megawatts, please. And the local power company says, sorry, a lot of people are already using this power. You can have 300 megawatts. This is a problem that when hyperscalers do pony up to existing nuclear power stations, they're taking the clean energy that you may have contracted for. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who specifically choose their energy provider because they provide clean energy. We have these contracts in the UK. I'm sure you do in Denmark. But what happens if somebody else has taken all the clean power, right? You don't get it. In the longer term, Amazon has SMR plans in 3 different locations. They are an anchor investor in a company called X Energy. I'll talk about them more later on. Google, they have geothermal investments with Fervo. They've announced SMR agreements with Kairos, another small modular reactor company. Microsoft have signed an agreement to reactivate one of the reactors in 3 Mile Island. Well, you may laugh. Yeah, we'll talk more about 3 Mile Island in a minute. But yeah, now that's going to be an interesting one. Now, they also have clean energy contracts, right, with the Ontario Power Group. Also, small modular reactor deals with them. It's a Canadian company that's going to provide them with some clean energy, or virtual clean energy. They also, very optimistically, have a nuclear fusion deal with a company called Helion. Nuclear fusion is a technology that is waiting, we're waiting for it to arrive, basically. Now, Oracle have got big plans for big data clusters and the intention to use small modular reactors. I don't have any more details on Oracle. Meta wanted to build a data center near to a nuclear reactor, but during the planning process, they discovered a rare species of bee that was in this area, and they've had that plan blocked for where they wanted the data center. Honestly, it's easy enough for them to just choose another location near to that power station, just move it a bit. But this is something we need to take into consideration, especially with bees that are an integral part of the crop life cycle. They also have an agreement with an enhanced geothermal company. So what we're seeing here is small modular reactors and geothermal as sticking out. So what about those small modular reactors? So a conventional nuclear reactor usually generates between 700 megawatts and 1.6 gigawatts. The largest reactor in the world is 1.6 gigawatts. You saw bigger numbers earlier. That's because they have more than one reactor on that site. So you can power a city or a mega data center. Small modular reactors, well, so one source at the IAEA, it said less than 700 megawatts. I think the European Atomic Energy Agency says less than 300 megawatts. But you could power a town or a regular-sized data center with that. A micro reactor, 10 megawatts. You could power a factory, a small community, a small data center. Now, the idea with SMRs, right, if you get the sort of philosophy behind a small modular reactor, first of all, it's a smaller project to plan, but most importantly, you don't build them in a hostile external site that might be raining half the time, snowing half the time. It could be horrible conditions on site. You build them in a nice clean factory where you can just churn them out on a production line, drive down costs, because we are very good at doing that as engineers. And that's how you improve the reproducibility of time to build and budget, and also improve quality. And they're small enough for co-location with a data center facility. And if you don't have enough power from one of these reactors, you just put more than one. That's what the modular means in small modular reactors. You just keep on putting them there until you have enough resilience and capacity for your power. Now, you would think, in a world of joined up thinking, you would choose 1 or 2 small modular reactor designs. You test the heck out of them, and then you just crank them out. So, I wonder if that's how it works in the real world. Well, let me introduce you to the 60+ small modular reactor designs at the moment that are being developed around the world. So there's a glossary of terms for the particular type of reactor down in the left-hand side here. So operational reactors, in China, there is a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor that's been operating for a number of years and connected to the grid. In Russia, they have a small modular reactor on a boat. It's actually a barge that is pulled around to a mining community in the Siberia somewhere, and it pulls up. They hook it up into the waiting grid connection and power that community for a while. The Russians have got a lot of experience with nuclear-powered icebreakers, and the reactor designs that they use on those use highly enriched uranium to allow you to build a much smaller but powerful reactor. So that's what they use on the barge. Under construction, We have a couple of different designs in China, including my favorite nuclear fuel source, which is thorium. And the fact that I have a favorite nuclear fuel source means that I probably should get out more. But they do have that as a prototype reactor in Mongolia. The Russians have got a lead-cooled fast neutron reactor. Very interesting because you can actually burn nuclear waste in reactors like that. And then in Argentina, there's a sort of very long ongoing attempt to build a PWR. A couple of PWR designs in Russia, and then licensed. So this is where they've finished the design, they've applied for all the licensing, and yeah, they've approved it. They've rubber stamped all the documents. Licensed in at least one country, a Hyundai reactor that's licensed in South Korea, and the NuScale pressurized water reactor licensed in the United States. NuScale have already tried to build one. And unfortunately, they didn't have a hyperscaler as a customer because it just ran out of money, that project. And I've no idea why the hyperscalers are not hammering down NuScale's door, because they are ready to go with another design, with another project, basically. And they would have learned a lot from that initial attempt. But none of the hyperscalers seem to be talking to NuScale. Seeking a license. In other words, you've finished your design and you've now applied for the licenses. Rolls-Royce are applying in the United Kingdom with a pressurized water reactor design. Holtec with another PWR in the United States. Now, an incomplete list of all of the SMR designs that are in progress, including one of my other favorites, Copenhagen Atomics. And if anyone knows about them, I'd happily chat in the coffee break about that. But they also use thorium as a fuel source. If you'd like another presentation for an hour on why thorium is a really good nuclear fuel source, let me know. So it could be 10 years from in design to operational, which is why I'm absolutely baffled that NuScale, that have basically chopped off 8 years of that 10 years, why the hyperscalers are not just saying, hey, work with us. But they're not. Now, what about nuclear waste? I'm going to make a controversial comment here that it's a choice. It's a choice that we make. It's not an inevitability. So nuclear waste, there's not that much of it. But if you ever talk about nuclear waste, make sure you find a photograph with corroding barrels, preferably leaking green glowing ooze. And if you can use pictures of Homer Simpson with the glowing thing down his back, that would be amazing. So look, nuclear waste is a highly regulated form of industrial waste. Of all the kinds of industrial waste, it is just the easiest to find out if you have any. For $35, you can buy a Geiger counter on AliExpress, and it works perfectly. There's a review on YouTube. And, you can't do that with chemical waste. All of those poor victims of the Bhopal disaster, where horrible chemicals spewed out of that chemical plant and they started dying, they would have had to pay $1,000 for a chemical analysis of the air and wait 2 weeks for the results. With a Geiger counter, it's $35 and it tells you straight away. So what do we do with nuclear waste? Finland is almost finished with a deep nuclear repository. That's the default. We're just going to bury it, which is crazy because most of the energy is still in the depleted fuel rods. Only France and Russia reprocess their nuclear fuel. So, that's crazy. And why do they do that? Free market thinking. Because it's cheaper to mine new uranium than to reprocess a fuel rod. That has to change. And third, you could use a fast spectrum reactor to burn that nuclear waste. You turn it into other elements. Some of those elements could also be used as fuel. Some of them can be used as medical isotopes. Some of them, the only reason you change the element is so that it decays very quickly. So instead of waiting 300,000 years for it to be safe, it's 14 years. And you just store it in a kind of regular above ground facility. So there are ways to deal with nuclear power. Now, isn't nuclear power dangerous? Well, here are 3 papers that argue that it is, right? 3 different organizations who don't like nuclear power. Links to those papers, you can have a read of them if you like. But the way I look at it is this. This is the cumulative number of reactor hours since nuclear power became commercial. And you'll notice there are 3 milestones: 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. So how dangerous were those 3 different incidents? Well, nobody died at 3 Mile Island, and the amount of radiation released into the environment was about the same as a chest X-ray, or taking a flight between Boston and San Francisco. In Chernobyl, now these estimates are highly disputed, by the way, but one of the UN estimates is 60 people. So 30 people died almost straight away, and then there were around 30 deaths of children, mostly children afterwards, from thyroid cancer. And the reason that you should be really angry about that is that every single one of those deaths was avoidable. If the Soviets had actually admitted that there had been a release of radiation and issued iodine tablets, which are stupidly cheap, to the population, those children would never have come down with thyroid cancer. But luckily, thyroid cancer is very treatable, and the death rate is extremely low. The reason that we can be very sure now that it's only 60 deaths is next year is 40 years since Chernobyl. If we were going to get thousands of deaths, we would have seen them by now. So, that's all I can say. How many people died in Fukushima? 1 guy. So he was a plant operative, very brave guy. He refused to leave his post, even though people said, look, you've gone over the radiation levels. He died 7 years after Fukushima of lung cancer. He was a smoker, just saying. Anyway, following the Fukushima incident, the German leadership, the Green Party in Germany had already tried to do this for many years, but finally the leadership said, yeah, we're going to close down all of our nuclear reactors in 2022. They extended that to 2023 because of problems with Ukraine. But they had to replace that power with something. They replaced it with coal and natural gas from Russia. There is a report from the National Bureau of Economic Research that there are 2 or 3 other reports. This is the highest number. 1,100 additional deaths occur in Germany every year because they close down their nuclear power plants. And it costs them $12 billion in social costs every year because they close down their nuclear plants. Greta Thunberg, now the headline says, oh, she's embraced nuclear power, will the Greens follow? Let's just be clear about this. Greta Thunberg is a very thoughtful person. She said this in the context that the Germans really made the wrong decision. She didn't just blanketly endorse nuclear power. I think she thinks about it on a case-by-case basis, which is the right way to think about it. But NASA had a report in 2013 that said there are 1.84 million people who are alive today because we had nuclear power. These deaths were prevented because of the reduction in pollution from coal and from natural gas, from oil and various other pollutants. So, I'm clicking, there we go. So I'm thinking 3 steps for hyperscalers to take now. Number 1, grab any spare capacity on nuclear facilities before the competition does. Amazon and Meta are trying to do that. Extend the life of existing nuclear plants. Amazingly, in 2024, the US Department of Energy said that 25% of US nuclear plants were threatened with economic closure. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? They've got decades of life in front of them, and you're threatening to close them. Free market challenge, right? I mean, it's just not joined up thinking. Number 2, you've got to restart any mothballed facilities that are recently closed down. The first one, by the way, this has never been done, right? The first one that's likely to happen is the Palisades plant in Michigan, followed by 3 Mile Island. Now, again, nobody died at 3 Mile Island. There were 4 reactors at 3 Mile Island, and one of them had a fault. And the other 3 continued to operate safely ever since. But about 5 years ago, the last one was closed down for economic reasons. Crazy. In Germany, they've got 26 gigawatts of clean energy that could be restarted by just restarting their nuclear plants. Probably the safest nuclear plants in the world because they're run by German engineers, right? A lot of the bits were designed by German engineers. Germany doesn't have tsunamis, right? That's what caused the problem at Fukushima. But the CFO of E.ON said there's no economic way back. Well, the reason is 3 Mile Island was shut down for economic reasons, whereas Germany's reactors were shut down for political reasons. You've got to fight politics before you can look at restarting them. So number 3, build the large-scale plants if you know how to do it. The US, by the way, has now set a goal for 35 gigawatts of new capacity by 2035. Don't know how they're going to get there, but it's a moonshot. And that was, by the way, under the Biden administration. You could develop new kinds of reactors like SMRs, and very long term, hope somebody finally gets fusion to work. So we could assume that nuclear power is too expensive, it takes too long to build, it's got a very bad image, people are going to try to block it. Nuclear power may not be the right solution to the world's clean energy problems because of those kinds of barriers. However, I would argue that producing general purpose clean energy is not the goal of the AI hyperscalers. They've got shed loads of money, which is the SI unit of money these days. That's where Elon stores his. And they want to spend it on AI because that once in a lifetime opportunity. But if you can't power them, why bother building them? Nuclear is not just the best option, it's really the only option. So I would argue that the dream of cheap, clean, safe, abundant nuclear power could be realized by the hyperscalers for their purposes, and then the rest of the world benefits. So final slide. We have this once in a lifetime opportunity from the hyperscalers, but they need a better AI. Well, you could think of better AI, absolute terms in regulated industries, or just in a relative term for competitive advantage. But you need more processing power, and that means more compute power and electrical power. And we've got those pesky corporate goals, right? Damn, we publish them. And by the way, over 80% of solar panels are made in China. So they could say, we were only kidding. Let's just carry on burning coal. But there are consequences when you take decisions like that. But of course, some of the hyperscalers have an alternative, right? We could go to Mars. Some of us could go to Mars. Except it's not some of us. None of us in this room are getting a ticket to Mars, right? It's them. They've got the Planet B option. Nuclear seems like a great alternative, but we seem to have forgotten how to build it. Well, not everybody has forgotten how to build it. But AI provides a massive productivity boost. Yeah, excellent. Except we all lose our jobs. Gradually everyone's going to be replaced by AI and robotics. Well, the problem is, who buys all the hyperscalers stuff if none of us have got jobs? Now, there has been a warning about this. It's kind of 2,000-year-old, this warning, Plutarch, who said an imbalance between the rich and the poor is the oldest and most fatal ailment of all republics. Mankind has spent 2,000 years trying to solve that particular problem. We haven't done it yet, and it's actually getting worse. Maybe AI could help us. Who knows? I hope that's been of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Jeff. It's been a very, very enlightening talk. We have a minute for questions, and there are already people lining up, so let's take some questions.
Emil Petersen from Fiverby. Firstly, I think I would really enjoy reading the book called Less is More by Jason Hegel. It has mostly of what you're talking about is in there. And what it also mentions is that all the renewable power we are currently generating today is, it's just built on top of any fossil fuels we are also having. So we haven't really done any improvements here. The thing I take away from this book is that we should just use less power. I know that doesn't really fit with the AI thing, but that will solve a lot of the issues you are also mentioning. Just do less.
Just a really fast response to that. So I've written the name of the book down. I'm going to check it out. Thank you for that. Using less power, I really have a hard time telling somebody in the third world, you can't have the benefits of power that we all had And especially given the nature of the power that they would like to use isn't that efficient. It's things like air conditioning, right? Yeah, so yeah, just a quick...
Yeah,
quick
I'm talking about us, not in places that actually need it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But thank you again for the book recommendation.
You use the term free market economics repeatedly through there. Is it fair to say that the true cost that these companies are paying is not actually being accounted for properly, because all the externalities of what they're doing is being borne by us, the general public?
Well, that was certainly the case in 2008.
I was trying not to say it. I mean, it looks like a perfect case of greater fool theory.
Yeah, yeah.
And with the actual, so it's not a comment but a question, when will the bubble burst?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball, because I could short the market just before that. But thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for the comments.
Hi, Alexis Uhanen from Finland. You had a slide about hyperscalers and SMR. On the slide, you said that Microsoft signed a deal for 3 Mile Island in September this year.
Sorry, it was last year.
Yep.
Yeah,
So the slide has a typo in
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I'll correct that.
And also they said last month that they are putting their AI data center projects on hold because they think there is an over supply problem on the market. So you could add also the note that now they have a 3 Mile Island and no use for it.
Yep. Well, they don't have the 3 Mile Island yet. That's the good news for Microsoft. They really haven't paid much yet towards that. The other thing, when you look at Microsoft, they've got a different way of looking at data centers than the other hyperscalers. They often have to build data centers close to urban populations, and I don't know why particularly they're seeing a reduction in the demand, because a lot of other people I speak to, especially with inference and what DeepSeek did with inference time compute, a lot of people are saying, gosh, we're going to need a lot more processing power than we thought out at the edge of the network where the inference is being done. But who knows? I think it's very dependent on who you talk to. But I will make those updates. Thank you very much for noticing that. You're the first person to notice that update. Thank you.
Also, I wanted to mention that on one of the last slides, you had the Planet B. A lot of the writings about that topic is that if we can't even terraform Earth, we can't terraform Mars either.
Oh, yeah. That was meant as a joke. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that. Why not just terraform the planet we're on? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Oh, sorry.
So before you leave, I just have a little token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you very much.
A little box of chocolate.